So Wendover is pleased to continue our 2014 webinars series, and today we're honored to have Heather Eisenmann. Heather Eisenmann joins us with over 20 years of successful sales and leadership. She's worked for both Fortune 500 companies and entrepreneurial roles. She's dynamic, a motivational leader, and a coach with a proven track record of success and revenue growth. Today she's going to talk about the 3 keys to sales success. From past experience, Heather began her career at ADP, which is automatic data processing, where she was able to hone her sales skills and moved into leadership roles with a history of consistently outperforming and being in the top 10% of the organization year after year. She's done this through effective hiring, training, coaching, and mentoring. This has led her to build a strong career influencing others' success, turning underperforming teams and regions around, and delivering top-tier results. After capping off 11 years at ADP in an executive role, she moved into the entrepreneurial role as Vice President Sales at Lovis Technical Services. This provided an opportunity to build a sales force and program from inception, leveraging the leadership, coaching, and sales processing skills acquired over her career. On a side note, Heather holds a Bachelor's of Science degree as well as a business minor from Villanova University. We're very pleased to have her here today and to discuss the 3 keys to sales success. Without further ado, here is Heather Eisenmann.
Thank you, Frank. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to share firsthand the success we've had in leveraging the 3 keys. And I really hope that this presentation provides something valuable that everybody can take back and implement within their organization. But before we get into the 3 keys, let's take a quick minute and talk about the definition of insanity, which I'm pretty sure everybody's heard multiple times. And that's continuing to do the same things and expecting different results. And for the purpose of today's discussion, we should talk about what type of results are we looking for. And it really boils down to driving incremental revenue. That's where we all win in the sales game. And not only should we be driving incremental revenue, we want to make sure that this is a sustainable process. So one more assumption, right? One more thing we want to do before we dive into the 3 keys is there's a couple things I want to agree on with everybody that we're already doing. Now, I know when we assume certain things can happen, but for the purpose of this presentation, these are the assumptions that we're going to make. Number 1, that there's no more hours that we can add to our workday, that we're working as hard as we can and we're putting forth our best effort. And at the end of the day, we have a sincere desire to increase sales, profit margin, and revenue. And the bottom line is nobody is going to make a change and even think about it or look to engage help if there wasn't a clear return on their investment. So in order to make a change, whether it's personally, whether you're going to implement something in your organization, it has to make sense financially. So what do I mean by that? Well, think about your ideal opportunity. If there is a way to put more of these in your pipeline and improve your close ratio, does that justify the cost or the pain of making a change or making an improvement? So why are we here? So hopefully why we're here is to learn ways to improve the sales process and ultimately improve our results. And we want to take good to better, better to great, and we also want to take great to exceptional. And the reason why I point that out, it's pretty obvious we want to take good to better and better to great, but why do we have that last piece on there? Let's take great to exceptional, because that gets overlooked in a lot of sales organizations. If you're a leader and you've got X number of people on your sales team, and you think about the bell curve, if you could get 10% more out of your top performers that are way over on the right versus 10% more out of your bottom half performers, what's the net ROI? 10% out of your top performers is going to be a whole lot more revenue than the ones compared to the other end of the bell curve. So we don't want to overlook that group. And the things that we're going to talk about today apply to everybody. Okay, so how do we do this? It's the 3 keys. activity, process, and accountability. And the spark behind all this is leveraging everybody's individual strengths. So first up, you want to look at these three things, activity, process, and accountability, just like a three-legged stool. And you can all picture in your head what happens if you take away one of those legs. The whole thing topples, right? Falls over. So you might be doing one, you might be doing two, but if you're not effectively doing all three, you're not going to get the success that you're looking to have. And then the caveat here is, what's the spark? When you look at yourself, or you look at your peers, or as a leader, you look at your sales teams, there's something that everyone does just a little bit differently. They have something different that they bring to the table, and you want to make sure you're able to identify what that is and leverage that through these three things. You've got to have the three, but not everybody's going to go about it in the same exact way. And that's how you drive that ultimate extra bit of success, looking at those key strengths. Okay, so let's start to drill down. We're going to drill down on each one of these. So activity. Well, it's definitely more than turning up the volume, and that tends to be a go-to thing when someone's behind the eight ball or they want to drive more. They just try to do more. But if you double back to where we started, we said we didn't really have any more hours in the day. We're working as hard as we can. So turning up the volume on activity, not a management strategy. It's not a growth strategy, and it's certainly not sustainable. But it's a pretty typical response. So we don't want to go there. So the question is, okay, if we're not turning up the volume, what do we want to do with our time? Who do we want to chase? So do we want to chase relationships, or do we want to chase projects or actual deals? Because they actually work two different ways. So hopefully right now in your head you're thinking what the answer is to that question. And you got it. We want to chase both. We want relationships and we want projects. Because some is a short-term opportunity, others are a long-term opportunity, and there's always the influencer. And the other thing is, when you look at activity, you need a multi-pronged approach. You need to go after it from a couple of different angles, and if you can do that consistently, then chances are you're having the right mix of activity. Okay, so relationships. When you start to look at yourself and your role in sales, or you're dealing with the folks that report to you, you want to talk about who they should be meeting with. Outside of a decision maker who can buy from us today, because that's kind of a no-brainer, what other relationships do we want to pursue? So who are they? You want to think in terms of possibly strategic alliances. So who markets to the same people you market to? Okay? Why should we invest the time? So once you identify the who, and this is a good activity if you have a sales team, to go through and flip chart these and talk about who dovetails into what you do. If you're selling something but there's somebody that sells something before you get there, that's somebody good to have a relationship with. You know, is it an architect? Is it a general contractor? You know, it could be tons of different things. So think outside the box and then narrow it down in terms of who the key ones are and why you should invest the time, where the benefit is for them, and you know, what we can bring to the table to help them further their goals, because you know that's going to help us go after what we're looking for. And if you're dealing with some newer people or sales folks who have been pretty linear in terms of just going after the opportunity, you need to strategize a little bit on where we look for them. Where do we find them? What are the associations that they join that we could go to a networking event and meet them? And then lastly, what do we need to do? Because once we frame up who they are and where we find them, sometimes the question becomes, especially for newer folks or where this is a new exercise for them, oh my God, what do I talk about? Because you don't want to just jump in and do a dog and pony. You know, how do we create value? And this should be part of your multi-pronged approach when you're driving key activity. Now, with relationships, you know, a lot of times it's a top-of-mind awareness sale. So it's not a linear sale where they have a need, I've got the product or the service for that need, here's the benefits, do you want to buy it, yes or no, right? Really linear. So a relationship, top-of-mind awareness is we have an initial meeting, they like what we're talking about, we're able to provide value to them, offer them something they maybe didn't know, hadn't thought about it in that way, and we need to have a process where we stay in touch with them. So maybe we have an initial meeting and we talk to them quarterly. If it's somebody else and it makes more sense, we send them an email monthly trying to provide value. And the goal of this is to establish ourselves as a subject matter expert. That we're really good at talking about the stuff that we represent. And we want to convey our secret sauce. So what do I mean by secret sauce? Secret sauce is why companies buy from us, what makes us special, why you should think about us over any other vendor that might provide the services that we have. So when you start to identify these relationships and you get a meeting with them, these are the things that we want to talk about. We want to be subject matter experts, and we want them to know what we do differently than any other vendor that might be in our space. Okay, now let's talk about projects. These are a little bit more straightforward in terms of who you want to chase. It's good to talk about what the key criteria is for the companies or the businesses that you want to go after. You need to identify them in terms of size. Some people define that with employee size, revenue, all types of things. So make sure everyone's clear on what the sweet spot is, because the piece we want to avoid is if they're outside the perimeters that we just define in the project, size, timeline, budget, we might spend a lot of time chasing stuff that's not going to give us the return that we want. They might be easier to get into. They might want to talk to us a whole lot more, but maybe they're too small. We still have to go through the same process, spend the same amount of resources, try to get their attention, but at the end of the day, it's a poor return on our investment. So when you're looking at activity, make sure it stays within the sweet spot. Identify what the size is, how you identify that, what are the metrics that go into that, and what the timeline is. There's some stuff that's further out. There's some stuff that's right under your nose. You need to have a combination of both. So what are we doing this month? What's happening in March, or maybe how we finish out the month? And then what's our game plan for the next quarter? What's our 30, 60, 90 day? What kind of things do we need to chase to make the year? Maybe there's bigger projects that's got 6, 9 month lead time, and if we're working off a calendar year that we got to close it out by December 31st, we have to be taking specific actions right now. So you need to look at timelines and make sure that you've got stuff right under your nose, 30, 60, 90, and throughout the year. And what's their buying criteria, right? What do they look for? Depends on what your value proposition is and how you line up with the prospect's buying criteria. So if you're the low-cost provider, then you're looking for somebody whose buying criteria is just price, right? But it could really vary. If you're looking to differentiate yourself with your service or your product offering, then what kind of buying criteria lends itself to that? And when you start to look at deals in your pipeline, these are the questions you want to ask yourself, and these are the questions that you want to ask your sales team. And is it the right strategic fit? Do they want to be a long-term partner with us? If they're just buying on price, is the next guy going to come in 6 months from now and scoop them out from underneath us? So when you talk about your activity and you're chasing projects, it's good to make sure you can outline and define what we're supposed to go after. And then this is sort of the filter that you're going to use when you start to look at your pipeline to make sure that you're doing the right activity with the right people at the right time. Okay. So activity. We talked about the sources of activity, drilled down on relationships and projects. And now we want to talk about the mix, because it can't just be one thing. If you truly want to be successful, you're going to have a multi-pronged approach. So you got to leverage your strengths. Remember we talked about in the beginning the three-legged stool, activity, process, and accountability, but I also talked about the spark and what makes each person special. So what are you really good at? I mean, maybe some guy is really, really good at networking. Maybe you got a guy or gal who's really good at cold calling, because guess what? That still exists. Or maybe you have somebody who's pretty good at doing the research, figuring out, going to their website, why they buy, putting together a powerful statement, and they can pick up the phone and convey value. So when you look at your mix of activity, figure out what your strengths are first. Okay? And then you got to make sure that you're rounding it out. So are you doing networking? What kind of activities are you doing? And with networking, it's not that, yeah, I talked to a lot of people. I've gone to this great March Madness event on Thursday. A ton of people are showing up. It's going to be lots of fun. Got to have a little bit of a goal and a process when you go after that, and we'll get into that in process. who are the influencers, next bullet, that make your deals happen? So if you're talking to the CEO or CFO or a vice president of sales at an organization, but you need some traction to try to push your deal over the edge, who influences them? Who are their trusted advisors? Maybe it's their CPA. Maybe it's somebody that they are in a business association with. But you need to identify influencers and make sure that you've got specific activity to be talking to those folks throughout the month. Decision makers, those are also influencers. How are you doing a direct hit on the folks that make the decisions to buy what we want? And then strategic alliances. We touched on this a little bit earlier. Who else sells to the same people that you sell to? And so, aside from our competition, right? So who else is selling into those same buyers that we can form alliances with? You could start a networking group, because that's kind of a twofer, right? You've got strategic alliances, you've got networking, but they can give you a view, if they've sold something into them, on how they make their decisions. What's their buying process? Well, they always talk to 3 people. Okay, great. Or they like an RFP. Or if you can go in and you can get FaceTime with them and you have a compelling reason why they should buy from you, you can probably sell the deal. Those types of views into a company are really going to help increase your close ratio later on. So when you're looking at how you put together your week and your month, you definitely want to have some prospect appointments in there, but you want to look at that multi-pronged approach to drive your activity just a little bit higher. Okay, so we're not turning up the volume on activity, but we're doing a multi-pronged approach, and we're getting a lot smarter about how we go after that. How can we be sure that this is going to be successful for us? Well, it's all about the process, and this is the second leg of that 3-legged stool that we talked about. There's a difference between an event and a process, and they get different results. You've gone to probably some sort of sales seminar in the past, or today's webinar, that's an event. But if you don't put something specific into place that you do consistently, you're not going to get the level of results that you want. So whatever it is, in terms of your game plan, you've got to be sure that you're executing it consistently. So how do you make a process happen? First of all, you need to identify the buckets of activity, right? So maybe in this case, we want to talk to prospects, obviously, people that have a project, they need what we're selling, and we can try to get them to say yes, to buy to what we want to sell. We also want to spend time talking to our clients. Why? Because they're a phenomenal resource for us for referrals. So that should be part of your process, and that should be one of your buckets of activities that you're going to hit on a weekly and monthly basis. So clients, prospects, those are obvious. Influencers, that's a little harder, but they're important, especially when you've got a big deal on the line. You're getting, blacked out. You can't hear what's going on. You gave them the information. They have your pricing. All of a sudden, it's gone radio silent. We need a view into what's going on, how to push the deal over the edge. Or to find out how to gain access to some of the people that we know we should be talking to, but we've been unsuccessful in getting in there. That's where you need to spend time talking to influencers. And you need to go to networking events. Find out who knows who. So when you sit down with your sales team or this is something that you're doing independently, you've got to identify your buckets of activities. So for purposes of this call, we'll call it networking, influencer meetings, prospect meetings, and client meetings. That's a good mix. And then you got to figure out, okay, what can I commit to on a monthly basis? You don't want to say, yeah, I'm going to go after it, I'm going to hit it hard, I'm going to see all these guys. It's kind of like turning up the volume, but we don't really have a goal. So what's reasonable that you can do every week and every month? My recommendation, based on the experiences that I've had, I would like to do it weekly. Because if a whole month goes by and you never got to it, you lost 1/12 of the year in terms of trying to get to your goals. So you should have weekly and activity standards, and then you got to track it. So if we agree that we're going to see 2 of these and 3 of those, we should take a look back at last week and see how we did. I did really well with this. I did horrible with that. Okay, so let's tweak it. Can we double up this week? Does it make sense? But the process is really huge in terms of getting you to where you want to go. So if you're new to this, or you're tweaking what you have, and you're going to, as a result of this great webinar, you're going to go ahead and put some stuff into place, you're going to be taking a couple educated guesses. So you say, okay, here's my goals, and you should make a game plan to do it for a period of time. So I'm going to go see 3 of those, 4 of those, and 2 of those every week with a total of this target for the month, and I'm going to do this for either 1 month or 2 months. Give it a little bit of time. And then you got to execute it fully, because you don't want to half execute it and then start making tweaks, and you'll never know what works and what doesn't. But go after it for 2 months, and then take a step back and say what's working and what's not working. And maybe why something's not working is because I'm really uncomfortable with this. Okay, well, maybe it's those influencer meetings. I really don't understand how to position myself as a subject matter expert or to convey value. They're willing to meet with me, and then I get there and I have no idea what to talk about. Or I do this whole dog and pony, and they still don't really understand what they're supposed to be doing to help me. So there's an opportunity to do some training. Or maybe it's just small things. They had no problem getting 2 prospect appointments a week. Great, let's go to 3. Because if you can do 2, no problem, then chances are we can go from 3 and then ultimately get to 4, maybe 6, depending on what we're selling, who we're selling it to, and what the timelines are. So those are the types of tweaks that you're looking to make. The other thing is you want to look for trends, because in a business environment, stuff can change quickly, right? There are stuff that's happening in the marketplace that we may not anticipate. And you don't want to say, this is my process and I'm doing it no matter what. Well, you know what? Take a step back. If there's something that's changing out in the business environment, don't be afraid to take a step back and make the appropriate adjustment. Being nimble like that makes you powerful. So it's a little bit of a fine line, because you don't want to jump too quick and start making tweaks when you don't really understand what's working and what's not. But you also have to turn an eye outward. What's going on in the marketplace? How does that impact us? And how do we take advantage of this? You might be adding something to what you're doing, or you might be taking away, or you might be just tweaking it just a little bit. Okay, so before jumping off this cliff and moving forward with your process, one of the things that I really like to do, whether it's individually or with the team or encourage leaders to do this, is let's take a look back. Let's take a minute, and when's the last time you had to conduct a source of business analysis? And so what do I mean by that? It's pretty obvious, right? Let's take a look back at the last, and you have to figure out what makes sense for your organization. Is it the last 5 deals that you won, the last 10, what you did over the last year? But let's dive into the last chunk, let's call it 5, deals that you won. I want to know everything about them. What was the size? What was the margin? Okay, and then what was the source of the initial contact? How did you get that? Well, I read this great article. I used this great lead, and I called them up right away, and it took me 7 calls, and then I finally got in there. Or they got on my radar, I couldn't get in, so I had to leverage this relationship. Somebody did an introduction, and I got in. Okay, well, out of the 5 or the 10, what kind of trends do you see? What's really working for us as an organization? And then going down a level, what's working for this individual salesperson? Back to their spark or their secret sauce, right? What's working for them? They get most of their deals based on relationships. They get most of their deals because they can really be consistent on the phones. They're really good at following up. And then who influenced the deal? So maybe you sold to the VP of sales or the CFO or the CEO, but who helped influence it? That's important to know. And then lastly, why did they buy? Why did they pick us over every other vendor? And this is really huge, to be able to articulate this for every deal that you sold. Not, was it based on price? Was it because we presented something compelling? Was it because we uncovered something that wasn't really going well for them and they didn't really understand what the problem was and we were able to pinpoint it? Was it because we gave them something that they didn't have, a tool and a resource that was able to drive results? It's important for us to be able to understand that and articulate it. Why? Because we're going to use that information to go find more prospects and tell them why they're supposed to buy from us. So before you jump off the cliff with your great activity, your multi-pronged approach, and your goals on a weekly, monthly, and possibly quarterly basis, take a look back. Understand how you win the deals that you're winning, what makes them up, and that starts to put together what your sweet spot is. So, there might be a gap. What if you were having this conversation with me and at the beginning you said, hey, our sweet spot is this size, this is what we like and we go after, and then I look at all the individual reps and find out what they sold and they're outside the sweet spot, there's a disconnect. So we need to fix something. Instead of saying this is our sweet spot and still not being happy with what the results are. So you want to figure that out and then put your process into place. And don't forget to find out why they bought from us, because this will tell us how to sell to the next prospect. Okay, so all that type of look back and gathering that information, that's just intelligence. And we want to use this intelligence to populate your activity buckets. You want to leverage what you learned. So know what you're good at, leverage your strengths, and when you find some holes and what your opportunities are, figure out how to get comfortable and go after them so you have a more balanced approach. Now, we're looking for prospects, right? So what other companies look like the ones that we've just sold? You know, that'll help you put together a top 25, a top 50 that you should be going after. Part of your process and your activity should be a targeted prospecting list. So who we sold, what looks and smells like those, right? Next, who do those guys compete with? Because they're going to be a prospect for us as well. Then we can say, okay, who do we know that knows them? How can we get help here? So we can ask for a referral, a warm introduction, and then we can create and attack a new list of prospects. And if we can't ask for a referral or a warm introduction right out of the gate, then you know what? That's where we can leverage our networking opportunities to find out who knows them. So you almost can reverse engineer your networking process. Remember before I said we're going to get into a little bit on the networking? So instead of just going to a networking event and maybe you're great on your feet and you talk to a lot of people and it was fun, you got some cards, we're going to follow up, what if we had a targeted prospecting list and we really knew like these top 10, we're having a hard time getting in, we could pick up the phone, but before we do that, we want to find out how to get in there. What if we go armed to this networking event knowing who we want to talk to? And we know that their peers are in that room, or maybe they're in that room. So we go, we spend our time networking saying, hey, by the way, do you happen to know anybody at XYZ company? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. Or no, why do you ask? Well, great opportunity to tell them who we'd like to sell to. But you know what? If we go in and we reverse engineer our networking events, it's going to get us closer to getting after the prospects that we think are going to be a good fit for our company. Okay, so we talked sort of, in the weeds in terms of a salesperson and what you want to do, but I'm assuming there's some leaders that are on the webinar today. So as part of your process, your activities are going to be a little bit different. So how, as a leader, you want to ask, can you maximize the output of your sales team? And more importantly, how can you grow your organization so that you enable others to become leaders, right? That's what it's all about. So part of the thing about being a proactive leader is you got to stay staffed. So if you've got X bodies on your sales force, you always need to be looking for who's the next person that you're going to bring on board. You don't want to wait until somebody leaves or you have a hole in your sales force to start looking. That puts you behind the 8 ball. So if there's only one activity that each leader could incorporate, I would tell you to be interviewing all the time. Another piece where you can really help your sales teams is to make executive outreach calls. So when you're spending time with them and you're going through the deals they have in their pipeline, pick the top 5 or the top 3 and pick up the phone and introduce yourself as a leader. You don't want to get into the weeds, but it's a great idea to sniff out if these really are a good prospect and also emphasize how we like to do business. It's a great opportunity, and it also helps you make sure that whatever your salespeople are telling you that's in the pipeline, you can validate that that's actually the case. And as leaders, we need to demonstrate the skills and activities that they need to be doing. So, having those influencer meetings is a little tricky for a lot of people. I've talked about it kind of a lot today because it's sticky for people. So, take those new folks on those influencer meetings, demonstrate how you have that, how you establish yourself as a subject matter expert, and make sure that you're spending time modeling the behavior that we're trying to get out of the folks that report to us.
Hey Heather.
Yeah.
This is Larry.
Hi.
Hey. Why don't you, before you move on, because I think this is probably one of the most important things that you talked about, and just so that the attendees know, Heather had a very successful stint with AD, I always get it wrong, Heather, ADP. And what Heather won't tell you is that she was airdropped into the worst performing branch of ADP and had, I don't know how much time, 6 months, a year to turn them around?
Yep, 6 months, yep.
Six months, and then they would take her to the last to the next poor performing area and bring them up. So tell us, because a lot of us, some of the companies are going through transition and so forth, so dealing with some of those issues where maybe the sales process is behind the 8 ball. In your experience of turning around all those branches and taking them from the worst performing into the top 10, what do you think in that experience of sort of that turnaround mode? What aspects of leadership, or what were the key components to sort of reversing the direction? I think that would be really helpful to our viewers today.
If you've got an underperforming team, group, person, then there's a gap, right? There's a gap in something that they're doing in their sales process. And the faster you can identify the gap and train them and teach them how to close the gap and give them the opportunity to make the change, that's how you can get a team better. It's really easy to be a quote-unquote leader and tell them, we need this. I need you to do that. Well, guess what? They haven't been doing it. So you barking at them, I mean, you might get a short-term bump, but you really haven't done anything tangible to make a change. So you need to have the ability to figure out what the gap is in their sales process, and you have to get a little bit granular because the sales process is long, right? And so you start with activity and the process, right? Where are they falling down? And then you got to train them or teach them how to close the gap. And you don't overlook your top performers, because there's absolutely tweaks that you can get out of them to drive more revenue. Because remember, if you get 10% more out of your top performers, net, that's so much more revenue, whatever we're looking for, than 10% out of your lowest performers. And don't be afraid to leverage what people are good at. One size does not fit all. There's key components, which is what we're talking about today, but you've got to be able to recognize in people as a leader what makes them special, what makes them tick, and drive that first. And how do I do that? Look at the past 5 deals, past 10 deals that they sold. So when I go into an underperforming region, I'm going to help people, I need to know where they've been successful. Because the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage their comfort zone and what they're good at. And then while we're doing that, I'm looking for the gaps in what their sales process is, and I'm telling them how to fix it. And then I'm following up with them to make sure that they're able to do that.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. And in your experience, you talk about digging into those 10 deals. What is the relationship between reality and especially in an underperforming branch, and the reports that you'll get from the sales reps? Can you speak to that? In other words, because a lot of it is driven, from figuring out what the information is. Can you give us an idea of what percentage of the data that you get from the sales reps can you trust, or how much do you have to really double check to really get to the heart of the problem?
Great question. For me, I got to check everyone. I need to understand how they think, because one person's going to have a ton of safety blankets in there, right? I call them safety blankets, that they're really not real, but they want to tell you great stories about them. And then you got the other one who's a sandbagger, right? The one who, when they probably were in high school and took a test and said, I failed, and they probably got an A, right? So there's different personalities that really influence, no matter how well you build your CRM, say, okay, it's 90% if it meets these key criteria. Every person has a different filter with how they look at that, and you need to dig into it. So there's a couple things. You need to meet with your salesperson on a, in my case, I would say a weekly basis, and just go through the pipeline so that you have blinders on in that meeting. You can't get out into left field. And then for every opportunity that you think you can close that's in that pipeline, you have to have a clear next step, because if there's no clear next step, you have no shot at getting the deal. And then so then when you don't have that, you start identifying gaps in the information. Who's the decision maker? What other view do we have into this company? Who are the influencers? Who else can we talk to? Who else is sold to them so we know their buying process? There's tons of really meaty activity that you can drive by having these one-on-one conversations. And then for the ones that, if you're continuing to report up the food chain and you're relying on the information you're getting from your salespeople, there's some big ones in there. You should absolutely be doing executive outreach calls. Hi, I'm Heather Eisenmann. I'm the Vice President of Sales. Just wanted to reach out and thank you for taking a look at our company. I know that Frank's been doing a great job working with you. Wanted to have a chance simply to introduce myself. If there's any questions or anything I can assist you with, you know, I'm here now. What can I do? Here's my direct line. And you'll find out a lot by just doing a couple of those calls, which will help you coach them and find out what's real. And after doing this 2 or 3 times, you're going to know for each individual who pads it, who sandbags, you know, who has the sky falling, and then you're going to be able to tweak it from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Heather.
Okay. All right. So should we keep going?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So this dovetails into what we were just talking about. You got to get in the weeds sometimes to be able to build it back up again, and you got to execute the basics. And, you know, something as simple as them making the phone call to a prospect. What are they saying? Are we establishing trust and credibility right out of the gate? That is essential. So how do they do that? Ask them if they're doing it. Listen to a few phone calls. And if you can't say, yeah, no, that's great, you're establishing trust and credibility, work with them on bullets that they need to have in front of them to be able to say to the prospect. How do you establish trust and credibility? Well, if you're in a position where you can name drop clients and it's somebody that they know, that's instantaneous, right? Anybody can say we're the foremost leader in this, we're the best at that, but if you talk in terms of clients that are doing business with us, trust and credibility go way up. Whatever you're saying has to be compelling, and it needs to create value. Most salespeople will just give the feature and not give the benefit, and that's the so what. What's in it for me? If we're not conveying that, chances are we're not going to get too far down the line with this prospect. And if you're doing it right, when you're trying to get that appointment to talk about whatever we're selling, there's only 3 outcomes. Yes, they're going to give you what I want. Next, go to hell. They're going to hang up on you. They don't want to talk to you. Or, lastly, which isn't a bad one, is permission to call back at a future date. And that's a nice building block. So that if you've been in your territory after a year, you're not starting cold. You're building on, hey, I spoke to you last September. At the time, you told me this, that, and the other thing. And, you know, you gave me permission to call back, and I'd really like to have a chance to schedule a lengthier meeting with you. So those are the 3 outcomes. That's what you want when you have your sales folks on the phone. The other thing that with the basics is when you're talking to somebody, you want to have a closed loop approach. So you're not calling them back just sometime, or you're supposed to quote unquote follow up. We use that term way too often, and it's not compelling. So a closed loop approach is, if for some reason I don't hear back from you, I'm going to reach out to you next Tuesday at 10 o'clock. And the reason why you do that is to avoid that whole mental anguish that salespeople go through. Well, should I call them back on Tuesday? I don't want to call them back too soon because then they think I'm stalking them. But if I wait till Friday, it might be too late. Let's avoid that whole thing. So every time you communicate with the prospect and they say, yeah, I'll call you next Wednesday, absolutely, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, but then let's keep the ball in our court. If for some reason I don't hear back from you, would it be okay for me to reach out to you Friday at 10? And then you got to do what you say you're going to do. Because if you do that, you're establishing more trust and credibility that you're a person who does and says what you're going to do, which is really important when folks are dealing with salespeople. Okay, so the other thing is you got to nurture the connection. So if we don't get the yes right out of the gate to do what we want to do, we want to build. We want everything to be a building process. Every interaction that we have, there's going to be another one, right? I mean, I think statistics show, and I know, Larry, you've got this down cold, is it 7 to 11 touches until we can get an appointment with somebody? Is that accurate?
Yeah, it usually takes about 7 touches or conversations to build, and the best inside sales reps will tell you that the whole purpose of each one of those calls is every sequential call or touch builds trust with the client, and when they build enough trust, that's when they're able to actually get the appointment, but get the appointment with a nice trajectory of like they've already established some trust with the prospect by doing exactly what you said, which is if I say I'm going to call you on Thursday at 3 o'clock, I call on Thursday at 3 o'clock.
Perfect. Okay, and so when we're doing that, we want to continue to nurture the connection. That's critical, especially when you want to drive year-over-year growth. So how do you do that? You make sure that you're active on LinkedIn. You're doing the right type of networking. You're forming strategic alliances, and you're continuing to position yourself as a subject matter expert. Okay, so back to that picture in your head of the three-legged stool. This is the last leg, and it's the accountability piece. And if you don't have this, you're never going to get the results that you're looking for. You have to inspect what you expect. I said it earlier, it's really easy as leaders to send out the message, but the accountability comes from us, that we hold ourselves accountable to spend time checking in on a consistent basis with our sales folks to make sure that they're doing what they said they're going to do. Because you're not going to know what the tweaks are unless you execute something consistently to find the gaps and you make the tweaks. So number one, inspect what you expect all day long. If you send a message out, you should have some sort of activity that you're going to do to make sure it's happening. The other thing is, I think, like for me, no matter who I talk to or who I work with, I always believe that every interaction can be tweaked, that there's something better that can be done. Even if we win the deal, even if we go in and we one call close it, okay, great, but is there some little thing that we would do differently? And on the deals that we don't win, there's lots of stuff to talk about. So if we look at every interaction as an opportunity to tweak it, so when we see one of those coming down the pike again, what are we going to do a little bit differently? Are we going to be better at setting an agenda? Are we going to be better at, you know, they're going to follow up with us? Great. If for some reason I don't hear back from you, I'll call you next Tuesday at 3. You know, what if we forgot that one time? We want to do that again. And the other piece is we've got to be sure that the sales folks and we as salespeople are maintaining control of the sales process, that we always keep the ball in our court. And that's an easy concept to wrap your brain around. The challenge is executing it. You know, and I talk about it all the time. I talk to a number of salespeople all day long, every week, and this is like one of the key rules of engagement is keeping the ball in our court. And you know what? It's like a muscle memory thing. You might forget. So you have this great sales call. You're feeling really good, and they say, hey, we're going to make a decision on Monday, and we'll get in touch. And you're like, great, and you walk out of there. And then here's a real-life story. So I get a call Monday afternoon. I never heard from them. I said, well, how'd you leave it? Well, they said they'd call us. I said, that's great, but you didn't keep the ball in your court. And they're like, I know, I forgot, right? So all you say is fantastic, but if for some reason we don't connect on Monday, is it okay if I give you a call Tuesday afternoon? And if at that point you hadn't made a decision, there's probably some questions that I can help answer. So the next move always comes from us, and that keeps us in great control of the sales process, and we can eliminate the minutes and hours that we spend trying to justify when we're supposed to call back but not appear like we're a stalker. Okay, now, the other piece on accountability is we don't want to confuse activity with accomplishment. And this is huge. This is one of the first things I talk about when I look at people that are under the gun, especially people that aren't performing where they want to perform, because their first go-to thing is they turn up the volume on activity. And you get that poor sales guy who says, oh, I'm working my butt off, but I'm not getting any results. There's huge problems going on, right? There's gaps all over the place. Say you had two guys, and they're in two cubes, and their job is to bang the phones and make 50 phone calls. And they have to do it between 8:30 and 11 on Wednesday morning. And you got one guy who actually makes the 50 calls, and he talks to 6 people and doesn't get any appointments. And you got the guy in the next cube, and he makes 32 calls, talks to 11 people, and gets 3 appointments. Well, we obviously know who the rock star is. right? So what's the difference there? You've got to make sure you're doing the right activity. I don't need that guy to go make another 50 calls and get 0 appointments. I need to find out who he's calling, what research he's done, and what he's saying when he's on the phone, because clearly there's a gap. So don't forget to focus. You have to have a good mix of consistent, proper activity, but never take your eye off the ultimate goal, which is what we're trying to accomplish. And if you can make 3 calls, talk to 3 people, and get 3 appointments, if you work for me, I'm going to tell you to go take off, get a cup of coffee, and come back in an hour, because you're the rock star. And when we talk about goals, it's really important to make sure you've heard of SMART goals, but it's always good to revisit it. You know, that they make sense, that it's measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. I don't want to hear at, you know, the 3rd week of the month of March when we've made 0 appointments that you're going to make 10 appointments that week to finish out the month. I mean, that's not going to happen. So don't be like, yeah, let's go get them. I know you can do it. It's probably not going to happen, especially if they've only ever made 6 appointments a month and every month prior to that. So, you know, you have to say, what can we do? What makes sense? And what can we accomplish, as opposed to, yeah, you're going to sell $5 million this year and no one else has ever sold greater than 2.5. So revisit that and hold those goals up to the test. And lastly, with accountability, it's important when you're looking at your salespeople to be sure that you take the time to identify the gaps. There's always something that we can improve on. And when you're looking, where do I find the gaps? Look at your sales process. It starts with the research you do before you pick up the phone. It's what you're saying on the phone. It's how you convey value, whether or not you're setting clear next steps, and whether or not you're creating momentum for the close, and that you have the ability for a strong close and a closed loop approach, keeping the ball in our court to go to the next step. So that's your continuum, and you're looking depending, and everyone's different. So you got to use that filter and meet one-on-one with your salespeople to find out where the gaps are, make suggestions, and then watch for them to implement the tweak. And that's how you grow. You take an underperforming sales team or group of teams in a region and get them better. They implement the tweaks, and you've got to execute consistently. So to summarize, you need to make changes if you want different results. And if you're talking to me, I'm going to tell you it's these 3 things that you have to implement simultaneously: activity, process, and accountability. Larry, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heather. Listen, we've got Heather here, tremendous resource, tremendous wealth of information. Heather, we got a bunch of questions. Are you ready?
I hope so.
Okay. We got a question from Tim. Tim asks, for B2B, which social media is the most important for gaining intel on companies?
I think that's a great question. You know, I will look at it. I will go to their website. I follow a lot of companies and publications on Twitter, because you might get a little snippet of something that's fast moving. So I'm constantly looking at Twitter. I mean, if you're in the Philadelphia area, I like to follow the Philadelphia Business Journal, and I might see somebody bought something, somebody got a new job. That helps me tremendously. Definitely staying up to date on LinkedIn.
Okay. And then there's a question from Sam. Sam is asking, what's the best way to leverage LinkedIn from a sales perspective?
Oh, there's lots of good ways to leverage LinkedIn. I mean, there's you know, all-day classes that talk about that. You know, for me personally, I like to know who people know. I want to know what the relationship is, and I want to use LinkedIn and those relationships to gain insight into how somebody buys. I want to know what their buying criteria is. You know, for me, if I have to go sell somebody, I want to be the one who sells myself to them. I want to make the first connection and then leverage who I know that they know as part of my conversation to drive up trust and credibility. Other folks might want to lean on LinkedIn to make the introduction. I think you got to be a little careful with. I think warm introductions are phenomenal, But you got to be a little bit careful that you don't use that as a crutch because we don't want to pick up the phone and make the call. I don't want to tie my success to somebody else making a call. I'd rather make the phone call and leverage that person. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then we've got a question from Margaret. Margaret is asking, which is, for B2B, which is better to have a dedicated inside salesperson for appointment setting, or is that something that should fall on the shoulders of the sales reps?
Oh, that is a phenomenal question. As a matter of fact, right before I hopped on this webinar, I was having that conversation with somebody. There's not a one-size-fits-all answer because it depends on how big your sales force is, right? So say you came to me and you asked me that question, you had only outside sales reps, and you had 35 reps. And maybe you had an inside sales force and abandoned it. You know what I would tell you to consider is maybe you look at those 35, you take that 10% that's the poorest performing and eliminate that from your sales force and reinvest those funds into a really good sales desk that can generate leads for your better salespeople. And there you have a combo. And that, to me, would be the best utilization of your resources.
Good, Frank?
If anyone has any additional questions, you just need to type them in. I know we have another question that just came in as well. You will be getting a copy of the presentation. We'll send out a link that has the summary and all of the bullet points that Heather talked about today.
So, great. And Heather, can you talk about a little bit about, I know you sort of touched on it, but talk about the difference in the skill set between, sort of the art form of prospecting versus managing customers. Can you talk about those sort of different skill sets?
When you talk about managing customers, those are our existing clients and how we stay in touch with them versus making cold calls to drive new prospects?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I mean, customers are a great place to start. So if you have existing customers in your territory as a sales rep, you want to have lots of dialogue with them to make sure you know firsthand, why they buy from us and why they stay. And you probably ought to find out what would cause them to leave. And you don't want to ask those directly, obviously, but that should be the goal of conversations that you have with your existing customers, number one, because you're going to use that information to identify a list of prospects that you're going to go after, your targeted prospecting, and then you can talk to them in terms of real-life scenarios so that you're not just doing a feature dump. If you're telling real stories, that's going to drive up trust and credibility and put you in a stronger position to probably get the appointment or get what you're asking for. And then the other thing, when you're managing clients and customers, we need them for referrals. So you want to find out who they know. And they might not know or be thinking about it, or you get that you ask, you finally remember to ask them, and they say, yeah, if anyone ever asks me about it, I'm going to tell them to call Frank. Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of half the job. So what I find when I'm dealing with the customers, go through their LinkedIn if they're on there. Find out who they know. Maybe you can ask them specifically, hey, I was on LinkedIn. I noticed that you're LinkedIn with these 5 people. How well do you actually know them? Because they're really in our target market. Would you be comfortable making an introduction? That's one way to go after it. If they're not using LinkedIn, but they know lots of people, tell them, hey, here's how we build our business. We love getting referrals from happy customers. You've conveyed to me that you're delighted with what we've sold you, and this is the type of company that we look for. If it's okay with you, I'll double back with you in a week, say Friday at 10, and see if there's anybody you can think of that might make sense for me to talk to. So now they know you're coming and you didn't put them on the spot. I find that when we ask the direct question, people end up drawing blanks and then give you that, yeah, if I think of anybody, I'll let you know.
Great. Yeah, and we look at it from the perspective, like a lot of times when we're talking to our clients, we always get the, you know what, Larry, once we get on stage, we don't have a problem, closing people. We've got a 30, 40, 50% close ratio. If I can only set more appointments. And from looking at it and working with different clients, what we found is like one of the top reasons that a sales rep, especially in B2B, fails to make quota is just simply they failed to set enough quality appointments in order to achieve their goal. And quite often it boils down to if sales rep A sets 10% more appointments, obviously of the same quality, average sales is going to stay the same, closing ratio stays the same, they're going to sell 10% more. And what we found is there's three things that companies can look at in order to increase appointment setting, and that is making sure that you have the right technology in place, something that's going to assist the salespeople in setting more appointments, not necessarily managing the customer relationship. The second thing, which you talked about extensively, is there's a process. Now, we didn't have time to get into that today, but there's definitely a specific process for setting appointments. We'll have an upcoming webinar on that. And then the third thing is lead flow. And then, Heather, I'm going to put you on the spot. John's putting us on the spot.
No, don't put me on the spot.
Well, no, I guess I'm on the spot because John asked which purchase lead sources, in your opinion, are those, in your opinion, to set appointments, I guess is what he's asking. Which purchase
and that's you, Larry.
Yeah,
you can talk to that better than anybody.
Well, I think first off, I think there's a lot of great lead sources, not just Wendover. And I always chuckle when someone calls up and says, hey, we're using, XYZ company and the quality of their leads have gone down. And then I'll ask them the questions, Heather, like, do you have an inside salesperson? Well, no. Do you have more salespeople or less salespeople? Well, we have 10% less salespeople. And you kind of peel back the onion and you find out, and I'll always tell them, I'll say, listen, I know that lead source, it's a good lead source. If you're having diminished success with that, it's probably not the lead source. It's probably the process or the technology. So, and we have clients who are very successful not only with Wendover, but any company that's been around for 5 or 10 years or more probably has a good lead source. And for take Wendover out of the question, and Heather, maybe you could echo this. If you're struggling with setting appointments, the lead source is probably not the place to look. It's probably the technology or the process. And forget about Wendover. In your career in other industries, does that seem like a decent framework to kind of look at that kind of conundrum?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if they're having problems setting appointments, then we're either not getting to the person that we need to talk to, so they're getting screened out. So that's a whole training issue, right? And then if you finally get the person that you want on the phone and you can't get an appointment, then there's something wrong with what you're saying. So you're not compelling and you're not setting up trust and credibility. And without those three things, I'm not sure why they'd want to meet with you anyways. So you've got a sanity check that you can say, yep, I can do that, and how do you convey that? How do you do trust, credibility, and that you're compelling? And so and then you have something to work with. And then the next thing is, oh, we do all those. We still can't get appointments. Great. Then you're not handling the objection. Because most people, after they listen to your trust-building, compelling statement, most folks are going to give you an objection. So you should understand what the top 10, whatever it is, 15, 12, 5 objections that you're probably going to get, and that you know how to handle them, and then close for what you asked for to try to get the outcome. Yes, you can have what you're asking for. 2, go to hell, I still don't want to talk to you. Or 3, sounds good, not a good time now, and permission to call back at a future date. Those are the only 3 outcomes.
Great. Don, more questions about lead sources. Don is asking about our opinion of Hoover's. And I think that, again, Hoover's is a great company. And what I can tell you is the more information, the more data sources that you have, the higher the probability that you're going to find more deals. What I can tell you is my rock stars. We have about 10,000 companies that we've done business with. There's only about 200 out of those 10,000 that I put in my rock star status. And a rock star is somebody that no matter what the economy, no matter what their competition, they consistently drive incremental sales every quarter and incremental margin. And what they tell me is the one thing that differentiates them from the other 9,800 is this thirst for more data. And typically my rock stars are utilizing 8 different lead sources at the same time because leads are the fuel that you add to your machine. So the more efficient your machine is, and the more you run the machine, the more deals you're going to get out of that. So, you know, if you're looking for a company that's going to provide intel on companies, I think Hoover's is a good choice. Somebody, John.
John again.
Yeah, John wants to know who the most successful companies are because he wants to go in and hire from them. That's brilliant, John. I'm sworn to secrecy. Actually, Heather, I've got one client who's got an inside sales rep, and this is unusual. Guy works from home. He's in the commercial moving business. This year, this kid is going to bring in an extra $2 million in revenue, which for commercial moving is phenomenal. And once you find, and listen, by the way, for us even to hire an inside salesperson here at Wendover, it typically takes us 6 hires to get one person that will that will stick. That's at the at that super high level of productivity. And one thing I can share with the group, we have just a few seconds more, is one of the most successful guys that I've met in the last year grew his company from 0 to 50 million in the last 6 years. And I asked him, what's the secret to your success? And he said, Larry, every day I've got 40 sales reps that are out knocking on doors from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. You know who I'm talking about, Heather. And I said, what do you mean, cold calling? He goes, no, knocking on doors. And then I asked him, and this is the parting shot that I'll leave you with, and I'll get out of your hair, is I said, well, you know, what's the biggest mistake that you've made? And in half a second he said, holding on to Johnny, you know, the sales rep, too long because Johnny's a nice guy. So they're very difficult to find. What I can tell you is they will self-identify, and maybe you could speak to this, you know, as a closing statement, Heather. I found that the best sales reps, best inside, best outside sales reps outperform, just blow your mind within the first week or the first month, and require very little tweaking to get them productive.
Yeah, I would concur. Absolutely. You know who those people are. You know when you meet them. You know when you meet them at a networking event and think, oh my God, if I had one of those working for my company. They do. But then we got to go deal with the rest of the people, right, to try to get productivity out of them. And that's a little bit more work.
Yep. So I apologize, we weren't able to get to all the questions. Heather, thank you so much. Rare opportunity. Really appreciate it. Any other questions for Heather or us, you can reach out to me at larry@insightprm.com. Any suggestions for upcoming webinars, please let us know. We're always looking for you know, content that you guys are interested in learning about, and you know, Heather's passion and our passion here at Wendover is helping you guys succeed, and we're here to help. So thank you very much, Heather.
All right, thanks. My pleasure.